All right, you guys. So today I wanted to go over something from last week for you guys, about 10 minutes ago for me. We're going to talk about some of the things that you need to pay attention to when you're torque tuning, or some of the things that you might have questions about in this video. So stick around if you're interested. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the torque tuning at different distances. I said in that video that I wanted to torque tune my bow, the USAT bow, at 55 yards because 50 meters or 55 yards is what the bow is tuned at, or what the bow is shot at in USAT events. So I wanted to make sure that my torque tune is proper for that distance. So the reason I want to do that is because I don't personally know if torque tuning at 40 yards and torque tuning at 80 yards, if there's going to be a difference in where the sight's going to be wanting to sit. At 80 yards, it may be a couple notches further back or further in than it might be at 40 yards. So I just always do it at the distance that I'm going to actually shoot the bow in. If it's a 3D bow where I'm going to be doing from 50 yards to 0 yards, you can kind of just gauge on what you think your closest distance is going to be. So like if you think you're going to be shooting your closest distance at 20 yards for any given 3D tournament, then you can do maybe a 37.5 or a 40-yard distance to torque tune your bow, and that'll give you a good medium between the two distances. So that's the one thing I wanted to touch on. The first thing I wanted to touch on. The second thing is what's going to happen to your actual sight picture when you start moving this scope up and down on your bow. So if it's sitting on your bow, what happens when you bring it in to your riser, and what happens when you bring it out from your riser. So what's going to happen when you bring it in to your riser is, one, you're going to get less scope magnification on the target. So the target's going to look further away than what it would be if it was fully extended. Two, it's going to make your actual housing on this scope, this scope housing, it's going to make that look bigger because it's closer to you. So you're going to need, we'll get into the apertures in a second, but you're going to need a different aperture for that size. So what I've found is generally there's either 2 or 3 different torque tune positions that are most ideal, and they're very, very similar. Of course, there's, the one that's about perfect, and then there's 2 that are, really close to that, but not quite exactly what you'd want. What I've found is that if you want to maximize your efficiency with your setup, picking the absolute perfect torque tune isn't always the best option. Sometimes picking the second to best, or third to best torque tune position is more optimal. And the reason for that is you can see, hopefully, how much torque I'm actually putting on that riser. You're never going to do that. Hopefully, you're never going to do that in an actual shot. So, I mean, it's way over dramatized whenever you're torque tuning. And that kind of brings me to another point I wanted to touch on too, is how much you actually torque your bow when you're torque tuning, and if changing the torque will change where you impact on the target. And the answer to that question is yes, it will. And the way that I try to make sure that I'm consistent on my torque is I watch my cables, and like my actual cables on the bow inside of my scope housing. So like whenever I'm aiming, generally I have my peep sights lined up, but I have my cables kind of offset to the side a little bit there. Like they come out a little bit towards the thing. Especially when I torque it this way, I can really see my cables. And so what I do is I line up those cables in the same spot every time, usually right on the edge of the scope housing. I can kind of see, like on the edge of the scope housing, I'll be able to tell like they're kind of just brushing that position. They're kind of like right in there. So I can see where they're at, and I can do the same thing every time by doing that. I can torque it the same amount every time. When you torque it this direction, or for you guys it would be let's see, so it'd be this position, like this way for you guys. when you torque it out that way, when you're putting your thumb pressure into the bow, it's going to be a whole lot harder to tell how much you're torquing the bow, or to be consistent in doing that. So you can use whatever you can see and through your peep sight, or even peripheral on the outside of your peep sight. You can use something on your setup to do that. And obviously you guys want to make sure you're being very careful not to over torque your bow, because you can derail a bow by torquing it too much. If you're putting tons of torque into it, what you're also doing is changing your cams. So your cam is also twisting with that. So when you release, the string doesn't have a track to go into, and it'll just ride right off the cam. So obviously be very careful about torquing way too much. Don't torque too much. So to get back on the topic of scope magnification, basically there's going to be a spot where you have optimal scope magnification matched with an aperture size where you can get a clear picture of the target and a mostly clear picture of your pin. And then there's also going to be the clarification aspect of it. If you're using a lens, obviously you probably are if you're watching these videos, because that's kind of what I do, is target size stuff. But if you're using a lens, you're going to have to be careful with your clarifier. So the more you bring the scope in, the less power of a clarifier you're going to need. The more you take it out, the more power of a clarifier you're going to use. If you're using the Hamskea Insight peep sight like I am, then you have the A+, A-, B, C, and D, all those different ones. So basically A is the position where the sight is all the way up against the bow. We're going to say that's A, right? And that's probably not correct, but let's say that's A. This is B, C, D, right? So the further you take it out, the higher letter that you're going to need for your lens to be clear, so that you can actually see the target or what you're aiming at. But when you do that, the clearer your target gets, the more blurry or disvisible, if that's a word, your pin becomes. So what you can do to combat that is change your aperture size. And the smaller your aperture size gets, the darker the image becomes. So it's not as bright and vibrant of an image through your peep sight looking at the target, but you can see your pin a lot better. So it's just something that you're going to have to play with and put different positions and try to go back and forth and kind of just put the pieces of the puzzle together until you have one of the top positions of your torque position, or where you torque tune. There's like top 3 or whatever, where you're in one of those top 3 positions, and you have a good aperture that fits your scope housing size, based off of how far it is in and out on your sight bar mounting bracket. And then your clarifier is matched up pretty well with your lens, so you can see a crystal, or at least a really, really clear vision of the target. And then the aperture also makes it to where you can at least barely see your pin. So yeah, that's basically the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to get across on this video, for torque tuning and setting up a sight so that you can see your pin and your target and everything else, and picking the right position for your sight bar. But I also want to just quickly touch, while you guys are here, how important it is to see your pin over your target, because I feel like that might be a question that gets asked from this. And in my opinion, it's well more important to be able to see your target clear than it is your pin. And the reason for that is because when you start to focus on your pin, it doesn't really matter what's behind that. You're focused on the pin. You can't subconsciously kind of focus on the image behind it as easily as you can focus on the target, have the pin kind of in your peripheral, and then have that pin will subconsciously want to go to where you're looking. So when you're looking at your pin, it's already where you're looking. The pin is already where you're looking. So it can't find the right spot that you want to aim at as easily as it can if you're looking at what you want to hit, and then the pin goes to that. So that's why I like to have my target more clear than my pin. And actually, when I run my USAT setup, I have a slightly blurry target. I'm just slightly, not very much, and then my pen is very, very dim, so it's kind of barely visible actually. I can just see the haze of the black dot, and it's a very small black dot, and that's another way you can change whether or not you can see your pen, or whatever you're using is the size of it, so you can take that into consideration too. But yeah, I try to make it to where I can just barely see the pin, and then I can focus on the target and the pin will go there, and then I can just work on focusing on aiming until the shot executes, and then I can just kind of focus on the follow through from there. But anyways, that's all I want to talk about. Thanks for checking out the video as always, guys. Thanks for taking time out of y'all's day to come watch my videos. I really do appreciate it. If you guys don't mind, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, because every time you guys like the video, it gets pushed to somebody else out there in the YouTube world. And then subscribing obviously helps me out in the long term of things, because the channel makes a little bit of money, which makes it easier for me to be able to do these videos. So again, I appreciate you guys. Until next time, I'll see y'all on the next video.